My name is Zach. I'm the co-founder and CEO of IndieSource. We've launched, at this point, we're very close to 300. I think we're just breaking the 300 mark in fashion brands that we have launched. I have literally done what you guys are doing so many times. Like, I can't explain how much I've done this in my life. And I wish I didn't have to do this, but throughout the process of building brands, we've gone through every possible issue you could imagine. And so I've learned a ton about how to deal with manufacturers. And before I get into anything, I'll come down here and talk about this, but there's two. I've been thinking about this, how to boil it down. One of my big problems with people that teach new designers is that they give too much information. There's just too much to think about. There's too much to deal with. And you're just like, not sure. Okay, well, what? So there's two words that I literally want every single one of you to write down on your paper or whatever. Okay? There's two words. The number one word is empathy. And the number two word is specificity. So to make my entire conversation extremely short, that's it. Like, if you take away one thing from this, those are the two number one things. And as I go through this, you'll notice that these things pop up. If you can be specific and you can have empathy and understand who you're talking to and what their motives are, you will be infinitely more successful in your journey, okay? So I know you guys are all in different stages, and some of this stuff I'm gonna skip through because Michael has talked about it already. Yes, you wanna create some financial assumptions and some different things, but in the beginning, I understand you don't know what you don't know, okay? So you wanna prepare what you do have, and so the first step in kind of identifying the first step is identifying the relationship and what you're looking for, right? A lot of you are what's it called in the product development or the pre-product development phase, where you're just building out what you're gonna be making, okay? It's really important that you ask good questions when you're starting to research manufacturers to see whether they really handle product development or they do sampling as a means to get you into production quickly. When I first started doing this, it was that old school, you give me 1,000 units, I'll make you a sample type of BS, and it ruins designers. It completely ruins you. And the reason is because you do not have the proper setup or foundation in place. You end up jumping to stage 4 or 5 when you haven't done 1, 2, 3, 4. So really know what you're looking for. If you do not have a product, what you need is you need product development. You need to make samples, and you do that by planning with very skilled people that know the industry, by sourcing the correct fabrics and doing that the right way, which is a whole nother thing that we can get into, by making sure that you have a pattern maker that totally gets what you're doing and has the background to make your product, that they've done that before. And then you have sample makers that are trained in your product and the specifications and the machines that you need to be using, okay? So some important questions that we can talk about. And he went over this a little bit, but I just want to shine light on some, like, I'm very opinionated about some of this stuff. Number one, is it acceptable to ask a factory for a tour before working with them? Factories that are not working on their project are losing money. So this comes back to empathy, right? If you are coming in without a very, very clear way for them to be successful, they don't want to show you or spend the time to do all of that, because, I mean, I'll even tell you, I probably get pitched 50 to 70 times a week from brands. If I'm showing people doing 50 to 70 tours, we're not making anything, right? So it is really important that there's real clarity. And what I would say is that make sure they're okay to do it, but don't make that the first thing you do. Really start to establish what you need and what the relationship would be and like what they're going to be making. Like, make them feel like this is really going to happen before you're asking for, you know, tours and other things like that. So I'd say, yes, that's important. Ask them what other brands they've worked with. So if you're, you know, a women's contemporary line, ask what they've done in that category. If you're a swim line, ask what they've done, or streetwear. Try to get a sense of like what other brands they've worked with, if they're willing to tell you. And they really should be. I mean, sometimes there's confidentiality, but that's kind of going away in my opinion. Most of our brands are pretty pumped up and like open about like saying like IndieSource made our stuff. And so I I don't know. There's very few brands that have an issue with that at this point. Make sure that they have certain certifications and licenses, government license, workers' comp, general liability. And then here's a really, really big one, which I think you guys will be interested in. Contracts. So very often manufacturers will not sign contracts. And we've talked about this before, and I don't really have an answer to why they don't. My opinion is they should. I think they don't because they want to limit liability. And but I would try to find those that do. And it's not to say that it's going to be a black and white. You guys are going to work through what the stipulations are. But for me and our company, it protects us too. It protects the designer and it protects us. Let me give you an example. Some things you don't know happen in manufacturing. I need to be in a contract. So here's an example of that. If you order 500 units, there's a very low percentage chance that I'm going to deliver 500 units, right? Why? Because when you're producing at large scale, you have to compensate, you have to order extra fabric, and then there's damages. So there's pluses and minuses that happen where you lose stuff, and then if you don't have a damage, then you end up over. So there's a little bit of a variance in what you're going to deliver. Now the contract would say, I can deliver X percentage over or under what the production is. Hopefully you guys can't hear that. It's really loud. And what that does, that ensures that the manufacturer gets paid for it, but the designer needs to be cool with that. They need to understand that that's kind of part of manufacturing and is to be expected. So ask them to sign contracts and work through with them so that both of you feel comfortable as you move through it. Oh, look, I just figured out how to see your faces. Amazing. There we go. All right, moving on. Okay, very important. Next one. What is your approval process in development and production, right? Ask them, what are the stages in which you guys get a say in the matter, right? When do you come back to me to say, hey, I need your approval, I need your approval, I need your approval, right? So for us, like in product development, for example, we have approval in fabric. We don't have an approval for patterns because most of our clients can't read patterns, so that would be a waste of time. But they do give us their specs and their fit notes. And then they have an approval when we're finished samples where they do the fittings and they say, yes, I love this, or I want to modify something, right? Same thing within the production. There's going to be certain approvals, although the whole point of production is that when you have a finished approved sample, there's nothing to check with you on, right? They should be ready to go and it should be very, very clear, okay? Ask what are the other associated costs of my collection and how can I make sure there are no hidden fees? What is this? Specificity. Like the number one frustration for manufacturers, hands down, is a lack of specificity. Because what happens is that costs us money. I get something, and even in tech packs, you know, I think a lot of times designers don't realize if you send a tech pack, going through that and reading all of it, that takes time. Or if you send patterns and they're not right, that takes time. It takes a lot of time. And so the more you can give people, the better. And if you're putting in an order, you have to start to consider all the little details. So how is it packed and folded? What are there hang tags to be added, stickers, labels, you know? Make yourself a checklist of every single thing that you need to consider. And before you put that order in, make sure it's talked about. Make sure that's really clear. Because what's tricky is when you get people throwing, oh, add this, oh, add this, oh, add this. And what happens from an empathetic perspective is now you have the manufacturer running around and they know they are not making money on the project. They're doing other things. So we want to eliminate the variability there and we want to allow them to focus on the thing that they're paying for, which is typically the per unit price, right? That they've already costed out. All right, next. So what are the factory responsible for? These are just a couple things. They need to make sure that they have good quality assurance, that they're really checking it. For example, we're full package. So we very often are buying the fabric on behalf, we're buying the fabric for our designers, which means we have to make sure that the fabric isn't screwed up from the fabric vendor. If it is, we need to roll that thing back up and send it back to the vendor, right? And so if there's a mistake, then that's on us. So that's a factory responsibility. They have to check the quality of the fabric. Second thing, open communication, transparency. So identify how often you guys will talk. We're gonna chat once a week, or here's our schedule. This goes in the third one, which is the whip. We're gonna be cutting this there. We're gonna be sewing here. We're gonna be doing this here. Get them to give you a timeline. Now, yes, things can change, but get a timeline from them so that you have clarity on what to expect. and both parties aren't confused about like what's happening. You have a calendar basically set up. Now, what ends up happening very often is if everything isn't set up in development, if you guys do not spend it like a insane amount of time making sure your product is done in development, then that's where you find delays in production because you've moved backwards. You say, oh, what about this thing? Oh, what about that thing, right? So again, I would spend 10 times the amount of time in production, in development if you have to, and very little issues will come up in production when you really have spent the time to make sure you have a finished sample and all of the information that goes along with it is completely ready to go.
Hey, Zach.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you clarify a couple questions came up? So can you define what a tech pack is for people, and can also a whip?
A whip. Oh, you're right. Okay.
No jargon here, right?
No jargon. I'm sorry. Wait, where's all these people in the back that don't have their screens on? You guys are killing me. Okay.
Yeah,
right,
everybody turn on your video.
I'll get you in the coaching session and it'll be good. So a tech pack is the information, it's the document that you use to communicate to your factory what they're making, right? Now, when you're producing in China, you literally need this. There's nothing you could do without this. Like if you don't have this, you're screwed. So you have to have it. In the US, like for example, with us, we kind of build it with the brands as we go, as they make decisions, but you need to end up with a tech pack. And that just explains exactly what the product is, what the materials are, every possible thing you could think of about printing, all of it. All the information that follows the product goes into the tech pack. What was the other thing? Oh, WIP. It's just your timetable for work in progress. So you know what you're doing as the weeks go on. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, moving on. And then last thing is stick to delivery dates. That's a factory responsibility, and they need to notify you if they can't and tell you why. What are your responsibilities? So again, don't change a statement of work. So once you have that good product and you're happy with it, do not go back and change things. It's a cut and sew job. Okay, let me be clear about what I mean by this. If you're working with a cut and sew factory, right, versus a full package, so they don't source the material and buy it for you, then you need to not only send them your finished fabric and trim, but also a very clear bill of materials, which is the information from the vendors. It's describing who the vendor is, what the fabric is, what the color is, what the width is, what the cost is, like everything about the fabric. If you are not up to that challenge, you need to work with a full package because you have to have that, because otherwise you're going to be shipping them stuff and they have no idea what they're getting. So that's BOM, super, super important. We already talked about that. Okay, here's another one. Decide if you want to know how the sausage is made or if you want to hand over the information, let the factory get to work. So we had a conversation when I did this with, I did this presentation with Startup Fashion out of New York, and they were kind of like, there's this whole debate about like, oh, is it okay for manufacturers to ask for a retainer? Like, is that cool? Da, da, da. Here's the answer. If you want to learn and you want to spend time, then be willing to put some investment into that. You know, you guys, a lot of these people are coming out of FITM paying, I don't know, $40,000 a year for fashion school. Then they come in and they don't want to pay for any time with the guys doing the real work. I would say make that decision. Decide if you want to learn and then be able to pay hourly or some sort of stipend to the manufacturer. If they're going to sit down and like give you many hours with them as you learn, I think it's a huge investment if you do it. Not every manufacturer will do it. It's another thing. Only specific ones will. But again, you want to be empathetic. So if you're just taking up hours and hours of their time and they're not getting compensated for it, you put them in a position where they're now frustrated with the situation. They have lots of overhead and they want you to understand where they're at. Empathy. Okay. Next one, MOQs. Gosh, there's so much to talk about on this. So I won't go into it. If you guys want to know about this more, you can let me know, but this is a big one. The short version is manufacturers have MOQs, minimum order quantity. They have minimums because they have fixed costs. What that basically means is there's certain things that they need to do regardless of whether they're making 300 units, or 3,000 units, or 300,000 units, okay? So I'm trying to break this down for you guys so you can kind of see what's going on. So there's two categories: non-value add activities, which are the fixed costs, and then you have value add activities. So things that you need to do no matter what are things like coordinating with the vendors, sending purchase orders, picking up and receiving fabrics, reviewing the quality, reviewing the approving patterns, speccing garments, marking, gridding, bundling. Like, I'd be really interested to know how many of you know that these bullet points right here are things that the manufacturers are working on, because they're spending a lot of time on a lot of other things that are really small, you don't realize, but those add up and they're fixed costs. Next, you have value add activities. So that's the needle to the thread, the actual packing and folding, the actual printing, the performance that the manufacturer is doing that you are paying for. So here's a little math for you as an example, okay? If I have $1,000 in fixed cost for a job, then as you can see, the more you make, the lower the total manufacturing price becomes. So this first one, if I'm only doing 50 units and I'm dividing $1,000 in fixed cost divided by the 50 units, I have a $20 per unit fixed cost I have to cover as a manufacturer, right? And again, back to empathy. This is all about understanding other people's business. The best brands are the ones that empathize and can sell. How do you sell? By understanding the person that you're talking to, right? And so in this scenario, we have to get a picture of what the MOQ does and why we need to make a decision, which I'll talk about in a second. As you scroll down and you do more, you can see that 1,000 is divided by 300 and is now $3 a unit fixed cost. You add that to the variable cost, now you have a much lower price point. When people say, well, how can you charge so much for a shirt? That's how. It's because you're doing one. You have to do all the things involved, whether you're doing one or you're doing 1,000. So here's the choice for you guys. And I think it's a fine choice, but often people get a little confused. And I'll let you guys in on a little secret. No factory has an MOQ. No factory has an MOQ. The reason they say they have an MOQ is because usually the people that ask for it aren't willing to pay for the lower units. There's no real MOQ. The question is, are you willing to pay for that because you want to make 50 units? That's all you want to make, and you want to put it into the market. And that is now an investment that you are putting in to test, right? You're not going to make profit on it, but you don't care because that's the plan, right? That's a very, very good strategy. It's okay. You don't need to do 300. You don't need to do 3,000. Very often it's 3,000. We start at 300 because we say that actually gives you room for a margin, and it's small enough that you should be able to sell that amount. So that's our logic. But just keep in mind, there's no such thing as an MOQ. It's just about paying for the work that needs to be done. Okay, here are some quick solutions and tips for you guys as you're working through making your product. Source and stock fabrics. Don't get picky. Find fabrics that are available that have low minimums, and you can just create. You can grab them and you can cut, sew, and put something into the market. I'm basically constantly fighting the designer that wants to spend like 2 years in development because they can't make up their minds. And I promise you, getting something into the market and then tweaking it is the right solution. You will be way more successful if you do that. And also the manufacturer then gets to work with you and do new projects. Do fewer colors, fewer fabrications, but run it across different styles so that you can leverage the minimums on different styles. So if you have a certain fabric you can use on a button down and then shorts and maybe a jacket, we'll put those together. All right, I'll skip some of these because we don't get so much into, well, I guess, let's see. Yeah, I mean, Mike talked about this. Think about what you're able to spend and what your budget is important, rather than saying how much does something cost. You want to go in with the retail price point and you want to work backwards to see what your manufacturing price point is. There's a lot more to talk about there. Decide whether your brand is speed, quality, or price. Put them in order. It's not to say that you're not going to get the other ones, but identify what your brand needs in launching. And then here's another one. I mean, because some of you had asked questions about financing. So I think we'll get into this more in the Q&A, but if you can use empathy and specificity, then you will find creative solutions to finance your brand, okay? One very often that I see is is partnerships with manufacturers where you say, hey, I don't have the money, but I can do a revenue share on the back end, right? I've seen that. I've done it personally, and I know a lot of other people that have done that. It's been successful. Obviously, you do Kickstarters, and we'll get into other ways to finance, because I know the banks are assholes and they won't let you have any money unless you've been doing this for 2 years and you have $100,000 in revenue. So I get it, but there's a lot of other ways to be creative with getting your stuff into the market. So I'm sure questions will pop up on that. Yeah, you're not going to break even day one. So just be prepared for that and try to create some sort of break even for yourself. So, you know, all right, if I sell this many units in 6 months, I will break even. This is the date, right? This is what I have to do. And this is where I break even. Same thing that Mike said, don't promise huge orders when you can't promise that. It's just not a good strategy. And then, yeah, I mean, the last thing is that make sure that you are really clear with your factory about what you want to do long term, and see if your goals and their goals align. The same way that you would in any other scenario, you want to make sure you're a good fit, and it is a marriage. So see if it's worth being married to them, and see if if you guys can build something together. It's an interview for you just as it is for them. So don't go in thinking that like they need your business. If you're small, it's just not the way it is. So continue to support the idea of empathizing with what they need and giving them the specifics around your business and your product, so that you can quickly move into production and pass that into the market where you're running product constantly and you have a program set up. That's it. I'm done. I'm out of time.